Hello, I'm your 10-year-older multi-millionaire self, and I've come from the future to tell you how I went from struggling solopreneur to seven-figure profit business owner. With that profit, I built myself a time machine so that I can come back to you in time to tell you some of the lessons I learned in the hope that you can use them in order to cut the time that it took you to get from struggling solopreneur to seven-figure profit business owner by half at least. It took me 8 years. I think you can get there in 2 to 3 if you follow the following 10 lessons. Lesson number 1. Use your network as a launchpad, but not as your entire client acquisition strategy. One thing I totally underestimated when I was starting out is how relatively easy it was to sell something to a stranger. You don't need introductions if you understand a target demographics problem and are able to phrase it back to them using the type of words that they would use to describe that problem. Once you have found that lock and key, all you need is enough people in the target market to make them an offer. By all means, when you're starting out, use your existing network to the maximum. But don't stress over it if it doesn't deliver results anytime soon. I made a video where I show mathematical proof that relying on your network is one of the worst client acquisition strategies there is. I'm going to be linking the video in the show notes or in the description. But of course, as you're starting out, it would be foolish to not take advantage of the relationships you already have. But any business that comes from that should only be considered gravy and not the main dish. The main dish is what's coming in the next lesson. Lesson number 2. Outbound is the way. There's so much cultural push against the whole idea of cold emails and cold DMing that it's really easy to fall prey to this ideology. People will respond to you, "Stop emailing me." And the big gurus all consider outbound to be beneath them. Well, of course, because they have broken through with content. And if 90% of people on LinkedIn rail against something, well, they must be right, correct? Wrong. Do not listen to them until you have a Simon Sinek-sized clout with your content. There's very little leverage that you can achieve with it. It really is important to develop good outbound muscle. And unless you can spend years without any revenue, it's better if you develop that outbound muscle, because content will take a while to get you going. And what do I mean with outbound? Well, cold emails, cold DMing, maybe even cold calling, although that doesn't work for every B2B service niche, but that's cold outbound. And this is the most important lesson that I've learned that I really want you to understand. I was languishing for such a long time in low revenue territory. I was sometimes even scared of where next month's revenue is going to come from because I didn't have any outbound prospecting practice established in my business. None whatsoever. And the rule is, if you don't have anything going on, you have to figure out how you can contact 100 people every day and make them an offer. So if you don't remember anything else from this video, then just retain this. Figure out a way how you can contact 100 people every day. Lesson number 3. Before you're successful, you have to make a binary decision with your content. The problem with content is that 95% of its value depends on the person posting it. That's why Elon Musk can post a comma sign and he will get 1 million views and 10,000 likes on it. Whereas if you post the most profound and insightful content, something that you really worked on, it might still be a dud because you yourself are simply not well known. You don't have much social proof. There's no real reason why people should be listening to you. So there are 2 routes you can take with content when you're starting out. Route 1 is where you become successful first before you give content a lot of attention. And when I say really successful, it means you can imagine what the metrics could be. If you're running a solo B2B service business, you should get to at least 7 figures. Any other metrics, it needs to be putting you into 0.1% in your market. And when I say don't put a lot of attention on content, I don't necessarily mean to not post any, but it should play the second fiddle to outbound or any other ways how you get clients. Once you're at a level where you are truly successful, where you can really claim that you are, you need to show proof of your success, whether that is by showcasing your wealth, which is something I don't really like, or you can just tell the stories. If you are a person with integrity, people will believe you and they will not just think that you're just BSing them. But there needs to be a solid level of success before you can get into the territory where you can post even relatively banal things and it will get you a lot of attention. So that's route 1, right? So get successful first, but while you're doing that, don't spend more than 10% of your working time on content. Route 2, the alternative is that you dedicate a lot of attention to content right from the start. You treat content as a real craft. You study writing, you study videos, you study everything that has to do with capturing attention with your voice or with your writing, and that becomes part of your whole modus operandi. But what you cannot do is to fall into this middle ground of where you spend 30 to 60 minutes every day to post some content. You're not really successful yet. You're barely making any money. And yet you consider this content to be the main source of your client acquisition. It just won't work. You don't have enough social proof so that the content itself can get you enough revenue. And this is the main reason why it's taken me 8 years to get to 7 figures. If I had heeded these 3 lessons, network is overrated, outbound is the way, and content will not bring you much until you are truly successful, or unless you really develop a strong content muscle. If I had heeded these 3 lessons, I would have cut down that time by at least a half. By the way, if you like this video, this podcast episode so far, then please give me a like, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to this podcast, and leave a comment if you can. It's going to help other people to discover this channel as well. And that way they will be able to learn how to avoid those boneheaded mistakes that I made before getting to 7 figures myself. All right, let's keep going. Lesson number 4, don't sell to big corporates, sell to small businesses. Now, of course, you can get to 7 figures by selling to big corp, but I believe you're making it unnecessarily hard on yourself. Yes, you also can run a marathon in under 3 hours if you are wearing a ball and chain on your foot, but it's actually easier without it. And here are 6 reasons why selling to big corporate makes it much more difficult to build a 7-figure business. Reason number 1, big corporates are much more difficult to get into than small businesses. It's going to be practically impossible for you as a solopreneur to capture the attention of the CEO. And as soon as you're not selling to the CEO anymore, the response rate plummets and the sales cycle lengthens because you're now talking to an employee. And employees, by definition, are much less intrinsically motivated than owners or CEOs. Also, they have sometimes quite a big ego because very often you are selling a skill that they think that they should already possess. So by engaging with you, they are sort of admitting a weakness to their superiors, which is not a good place to be in as a consultant. If you're trying to convince the marketing director that they should take you on as a marketing expert, well, the marketing director should know all this stuff, right? And that is what you are kind of battling against if you're trying to get into that corporate. Also, a big organization knows a lot of people. If somebody in some department realizes that they would need an external expert to help them solve a problem, well, then they will probably post on some internal chat forum and they will get some recommendations from inside the company because 200 people know a lot of people. And so therefore, because those networks are so strong, you as an external provider who's trying to approach them from the outside will have a much lower chance of success. Second reason why corporate is a problem is because big corporate require quite a big deal of customization. And that is only natural, as well they should, right? When you're paying somebody 6 figures, you better have some customization in the final work product. However, small businesses are much more open to templatized approaches. I see this with my own clients. I mean, doing outbound, establishing a good cold email practice is relatively straightforward. And yet the clients that I work with, for them, it's sometimes quite mind-blowing to see that you can very easily, through a virtual assistant, message 100 people every day, which also means that I can leverage products in order to teach my clients my skills, right? That is super key. When you are a big corporate consultant, the only leverage that you can get is by hiring people. Because it's not like you can ask a big company to watch your video course on something, right? You'll have to deliver those workshops in person. There's very little leverage that you can achieve with media. You can only hire people. However, I can leverage media. I can build a whole product where my clients log in. This is what the Alpha Lead Academy, my main product is. People come in, they log in, they watch some videos, they execute, and then they come into coaching sessions where they ask me detailed questions. That is very, very leverageable. And this is actually the product that I've achieved with just a few virtual assistants helping me, and with my wife by my side, I've achieved 7 figures. Reason number 3, big businesses are really difficult to influence and get them results. On the one hand, because they believe they already know a lot of stuff. Well, that's understandable. They've been quite successful so far. There's some organizational inertia to get them going. And also they are extremely cheap with case studies and testimonials. And all of that means that you will not have a lot of clear, tangible results, and you will have even fewer that you can go around and shop it to other people. Tell, look, this is what we did with this client. And that's a problem because very often outbound success depends on your success stories, on your client testimonials. Reason number 4 why big corporate is not very good to build a 7-figure business is because, well, it's simply risky. If you are serving big corporates, if you remain a solopreneur or a small consultancy, well, you will not have many clients. And if one of them falls off, then suddenly you have a big hole in your monthly revenue. That's not fun. Whereas if that happens to you when you have 10, 20 small businesses working with you, it's not a big deal if one or two of them fall off. Reason number 5, your sales muscle will atrophy, because as you're enjoying that fat corporate paycheck, you will be selling way less often, right? You don't need to bring in new clients very often. And that's why your sales skills will not be as good after a couple of years of selling to big corporate. And then reason number 6 why big corporate is not very conducive to building a 7-figure business is because your service delivery muscle will also atrophy. You see, small businesses are very demanding when it comes to the ROI. Once they employ you for a couple of months or maybe a year or two, they definitely want to see some results. Big businesses are much more lenient in this regard. You can actually spend years serving a big business without them really asking for any return on their investment, which is also why that when a recession comes around, that they cut all the external consultants because none of them can prove any return on their investment. I've met people who have been serving big businesses for 20 years who don't have a single clear-cut case study that proves the value of their work. This is mind-blowing to me, that you were able to work for 20 years and not have a single example of how any metric was positively influenced by your work. That is only possible in big corporate. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because when business dries up and you need to go out there and sell yourself, you will have no results that you can show for your work. And therefore, people will assume that you're not very good at what you do. So those are the 6 reasons why big corporate is a bit of a problem. Now, you may say that you want to start in big corporate because this is where you have an existing network. And that's fine. But again, remember, we learned in lesson 1 that network isn't all that important. Yes, by all means, get word out, see who you can get from your existing network, but that cannot be your client acquisition strategy. Well, what's the takeaway from this lesson? I believe that as a solopreneur, you are subject to a certain ratio. Namely, that is how much bigger than you a client can be so that you can sell to them. And I believe if we count employee numbers, I believe that the number is somewhere around the 200 mark. I know people who have approached strangers, heading up 200-person companies, talking to the CEO directly. If they're an expert enough, they as a solopreneur consultant are able to get a CEO of a 200-person company to pay attention to them. Beyond 200, it becomes extremely difficult to do this cold without an introduction. And so that's why I would put the number at roughly 200. That means if you're selling to a company of 1,000 people, you better have a consulting firm really well established with 5 employees, just as a bit of a guiding signpost. If you're selling to companies that have 10,000 employees, you better have a company with 50 people. Of course, you can serve a 10,000 employee company as a solopreneur, but you will be treated like an employee and you'll be disposed of like an employee. It's very difficult to build significant clout in a business when you are just yourself. So the upshot is, as a solopreneur, when you're starting out, sell to businesses that are maximum 200 people in size. Ideally, they're going to be much, much smaller. As you become more successful, as you get more and more case studies, you can sort of work your way up there. The business will grow. You're going to maybe hire employees. That's when you can then start selling to bigger companies. Lesson number 5, define a cash runway and then sell to only one avatar. What do I mean by that? You need to have a certain amount of money in the bank, right? You have to have expenses covered for a certain amount of months. I put this figure at 6 months, but everybody's a little bit different. Everybody has a different risk profile. Once you have that runway secured, and that's defined as if you didn't do any work, you have enough money to cover comfortably all your life expenses for 6 months, and you have that money in the bank after tax. Okay, that is what I define a runway. Once that runway is secured, don't do any more random gigs. Okay, only sell one single offer that you have defined for one avatar and just contact as many people as you can and sell to them. If ever your runway gets shorter, then it's fine. Accept any other gig that comes your way, anything that comes via referral. But as long as you can extend that runway again to the next 6 months, only hunker down and just do that one thing. Lesson number 6, volume shall set you free. There's a story that Alex Hormozi told about one of his encounters with Grant Cardone. And Alex was asking Grant, like, how do you get so much business from social media? And Grant Cardone told him to pull up his Instagram. And he asked him, how many posts have you put out in the last 24 hours? And Alex Hormozi looks and he's like, maybe 1 or 2 posts. Grant Cardone pulls up his Instagram and he shows 10 posts in the last 24 hours. People totally underestimate volume. Just once you have a winning formula, once that offer that you sell to one avatar has proven to work, then just pump out more volume. It really is as simple as that. More volume in terms of outbound, more volume in terms of quality content, right? Don't put out any crap, but as long as the quality is good enough, then you just put out a lot of stuff as well as more cold emails. You will get to those 7 figures before you know it. Lesson number 7. Outsource client acquisition as soon as you can. Once you have predictable revenue coming in, once you have an acquisition system built where you just put a certain amount of work in, and at the end of it, there will be a few sales calls booked, and you know that you have a predictable closing rate on sales calls. Once you have that, then outsource that as soon as you can. Virtual assistants can take care of outbound prospecting. And once you have so many calls booked every day, I would put it at the 4, 5, 6 sales calls a day mark. Once you have that, then you get yourself a salesperson. When I was at 15K a month, I outsourced my prospecting. And when I was at 40K a month, I outsourced my sales calls. Lesson number 8. The amount of work that it takes you to get from one level to the next is completely underestimated. It's going to be way more work than you think. And not only more work, also more intensity, right? You can work 12 hours a day, but you can work them in a sort of a meh way, or you can just insane intensity and focus on it like there's no tomorrow, literally. And still now to this day, I encounter people who apply to work with me and who, when we then talk about, well, how much time can you invest building those client acquisition systems? They say 2 to 3 hours a week. And then it gets into this haggling game where they are trying to get 5 to 7. Is that okay? It's just wrong. It's just plain wrong. It won't work that way. No Hollywood star or top athlete has gotten to the apex of their industry by negotiating with themselves how many hours they're going to be willing to work every week. It just doesn't work that way. If you want to grow your business to 7 figures, you're sort of the equivalent of a Hollywood star who's trying to make it big, or a top athlete, okay? You'll have to remove the term work-life balance completely from your vocabulary, at least in the short term. You simply have to approach the topic completely from the other end. You set a goal, 7 figures, and then you strip everything away that is not that, or your health, or your family. Maybe 2 friends, but also they will have to wait. They're going to get phone calls. They're going to get the occasional text, but that's it. And so instead of haggling with yourself how many hours per week you are working, you need to be constantly on the lookout for how you can squeeze more intensity out of every minute, how you can get more work done without impacting your relationships. And there actually could be some, negative moments. There could be the occasional fight with a spouse because you don't have enough time. There could be the slight pang of occasional regret that you're not spending enough time with your kids. I totally get that. This is part of life. If you want to achieve something big, there will be a few moments of pain like this. The pain is actually the currency of sacrifice that you submit to the gods, whatever you believe in order to get that outcome. And of course, that means at the very basic, like you cannot be watching any TV, no hobbies, no other pursuits, no artistic pursuits. Ditch all of that. And that is just about doing the work. Also during your off time, when you're on the toilet, when you're brushing your teeth, whatever, you have to be constantly thinking about it. There needs to be absolutely zero distraction. Like if you have a passion for ancient Roman history, well, it will have to wait. You cannot indulge in it and instead just purely focus on your business. That kind of level of intensity where even as you are waiting for the cinema tickets on your rare day off with the family, even then, when your family quickly goes to get the popcorn, even then you're thinking about the business. You're thinking about the next step. You're planning your next week, your next day. That is that kind of level of intensity that you need in order to even have the chance of admission to get into the 7-figure club. It doesn't guarantee you admission, but if you work in that way, you will have a pretty good chance of getting in. And I find it is really very helpful to think in levels. Levels are like plateau in your financial existence, you can say. Most people in the West, when they're at this typical normie middle-class level, they are at level 1. Let's call it level 1. It's basically they're in employment. They have probably some debt racked up that keeps them necessarily employed. They have a couple of thousands in the bank for some emergency situations, but they live effectively month to month, paycheck to paycheck. Okay, that's level one. Level two is when you're calling your own shots as a solopreneur, you still are dependent on some clients. You're making maybe 10, 15, maybe 20K a month, but you are effectively diversified. You have several bosses, so to speak. If one of them ditches you, it's not such a big deal. And you can live where you want because you work remotely. All of that is, I would call that level two. You're much more self-directed. You are way freer, but still you're not completely free. And then at level three, this is where you get into the seven-figure territory. This is truly where you have automated or outsourced most of your busy activities, where you have people doing your client acquisition, you have a product set up that does a lot of the delivery work, or you have employees who do the delivery work, and you effectively just liaise with the clients and oversee the delivery, right? That can get you then into a territory that you can maybe work 4 hours a week. That what I would call level three. So to get from one level to the next, that requires this kind of insane intensity that I pointed at. You can, once you get to that next level, you can coast. You can have a relatively good life maintaining things at level two. Level two, let's say you're at 20,000 a month. You can, once you get to that level, you know how things work. You're doing still most of the work yourself, but things are coasting and you don't need to be working 80-hour weeks. However, to get to that next level, to level three, you will again have to exert this insane intensity. And the level of intensity will predict whether you do that jump in a matter of a year or in a matter of 10 years or never. That's the key thing. My jump from level one, where I was in employment, and level two, comfortable 10, 15K months, took me about 5 years. And that is because I worked at an intensity of, I would say, 2 or 3. Maybe for the first 2-3 years, I was working at an intensity of 2 or 3. Then gradually it ramped up until it was maybe at 5 or 6. And then the jump from 2 to 3 only took 3 years because I was working at an intensity of 7. I still did not have everything dialed in. I was still a little bit distracted. I was following my intellectual hobbies. I was still, indulging in reading the news, for example, and so on. And now I'm working, getting to that next level, to level 4, one where I have such a high net worth that I don't need to, if I don't want to, work a day in my life again. And my intensity now is pretty much 10 out of 10. The intensity of work is also a muscle that you hone. As you start out, you're pretty crap at it. And once you get to the higher levels, this is why people's wealth curves go up like this. They're exponential, is because they also learn to work very hard and very focused. So that was a little bit of a long-winded lesson number 8, but this is super important. If you are able to maintain that level of intensity as you're jumping from that first plateau to the second one, and you make sure that you don't relent on that plateau, but you keep going. That is the secret of getting to 7 figures in a matter of 2 to 3 years rather than the 8 that it has taken me. Lesson number 9, stop being so hung up about what you want to be selling. All offers are not made equal. I often meet people who are just dead set on selling one specific thing, but even after months, maybe even years of trying, they're unable to crack the code how to find an audience that they can then approach and sell this thing that they want to be selling to. It's simply an offer that doesn't scale. And I've described this in my video about the critical density test, which I will link again in the description or in the show notes. And in that video, I point out how different factors influence whether an offer is suitable for outbound prospecting, which is the key to build a scalable business fast. You need to be able to approach strangers in order to build a scalable business. And these factors are things like, how often does the company have that kind of problem? Does it require a huge amount of trust from your audience to get in? How big is the company? How specific is the problem that you're trying to solve? How ROI driven is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? All of those factors play a huge role whether an offer is sellable in an outbound way or not. But I still encounter people who are just dead set on that one thing. And even after years of trying it, it doesn't work. They still want to remain with this. And if you absolutely insist on selling that one thing, and if you don't at the same time also know other people who have made it happen, who have built a 7-figure business selling that very same thing, then you're letting your ego get in the way. Then you're either acting out of ego or out of fear, but there's something that is very non-conducive to building a 7-figure business because you're trying to have it your way. You don't obey the laws of business, and instead you're trying to get your way with it. That's number 10. You are less important than your goal. If reaching 7 figures is your goal, then make yourself the servant of that goal. This means you will do anything, legal, of course, to reach your goal. You won't stop at something only because it's unpleasant, you don't want to do it, it doesn't feel right, and all of that. Many people start their business because they want to be free from the shackles of employment. Well, they are in for a rude awakening. Because if you don't want to continue languishing at your old salary level, even as a solopreneur, you will have to become much, much less free for a long time. You will need to serve a higher purpose, the success of your business. You see, it's not about you and what you can get out of the business. It is about what you can put into the business so that it thrives. You and the business are two separate entities. The more you put yourself into a serving role of your business, the better everything will go. And the shorter the time frame until you are truly free. But for a short to long time, depending on how much work intensity you put in, for that time, you will be much, much less free because you will be a servant to your business. Accept that and things will be much, much easier. If you want to reach 7 figures, then give up your time freedom and subordinate yourself to your goal of building a 7-figure business. And that's it, my dear 10-year younger version. Those are the 10 lessons I wanted to impart to you. If you heed them, I promise you that you will get to 7 figures in half the time that you are currently on the track to do. So really, really think about it if you want to ignore this old man coming from the future, because I would like to welcome you a couple of years from now and meet you much, much earlier than I normally would. And I know this is a bit of a mind warp, but think about it. All right. If you like this video, then please give it a like, give it a comment, share it with somebody you love and who you think would benefit from hearing this. I'll speak to you in the next one.